Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week, we're going to take it a little ways back to the arcade days. Mike's going to take us through a little bit of the history of the Gauntlet series. Mike?
Yeah, trip down Gauntlet Lane.
Yeah, dude. That's a street that I used to live on.
Really?
No.
Oh, that'd be really cool if it was. Did you ever play Gauntlet?
My street didn't even have a name.
Really? That's how much in the sticks you were?
Yep. Didn't have a name, just numbers.
I like that term, being in the sticks. Oh, I live out in the sticks. You know, it's cool.
Yeah. Still doesn't have a name. But this is not about where I live. This is about Gauntlet. And you asked if I played Gauntlet. I've played Gauntlet Legends on the PlayStation. That's it.
That's it? Okay, well, this is going to be very informative for you. Okay, so.
Can't wait.
First thing first, I used sources-wise. We're gonna talk. I'm trying to do that every episode, just to say, like, because obviously Wikipedia. I mean, that's the best way to get started. That's how. Spoilers, and I think you all know this already. That's how we get started. But this time, there's a really, really, really good video called "The History of Gauntlet." It's by Patman QC. It's on YouTube, and it's just fantastic. It's really good, very informative, and also they do a lot of videos in general about arcade history, and I think you should watch them if you're interested in this. Obviously, we can't cover everything on this show, but Patman QC sure does. So you should check out that channel. Also, if you go join to our new Discord,
we have a Discord.
I already put the link there if you want to look at it. But yeah, well, I'll get more into detail in the Discord and how you can join that later on. So Gauntlet starts with Ed Log. Do you remember Ed Log? Ed Log created Asteroids and Centipede for Atari.
Oh, yeah. Taking it way back.
Yeah, we're actually going to have a lot of stuff about Atari. I'm going to reference a lot of things that we talked about in our Atari episode. So you could listen to that, or you could just Google it. You know, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. You can do whatever you want. But if I say something and you feel like I'm skipping over, it's probably because we covered it in the Atari episode already. So Log wanted to create a 4-player co-op arcade game, and there were a few out at this point, but not a lot doing it well. And his son was super in to Dungeons and Dragons. You know that game, Tyler? Tabletop.
I do know.
Pen and paper role-playing, very popular now.
I am familiar with the concept, have never really played it, though.
Well, I play and I DM, so that's a fun thing for everyone to know about. But also, this kind of inspired Log to make a fantasy-based dungeon crawler, and he actually, in doing research beforehand, like trying to figure out how he was going to implement this game, found that Atari had already made a top-down 4-player co-op fantasy arcade game, but on computer, not arcade game, excuse me, for the Atari 8-bit computer. Remember that? It was called, and the game was called Dandy, D-A-N-D-Y. Now, Dandy is super interesting because it was actually created based on the programmer's 1982 bachelor's thesis at MIT.
Wow.
Yeah, so Jack Palovich was getting his bachelor's degree at MIT, and his thesis was this game, and it was called Thesis of Terror. And the original concept for Thesis of Terror, which would become Dandy, was actually to have 5 people play, so 4 players, and then 1 person on a separate computer being the dungeon master, just like in D&D. So you'd have
that sounds fun.
Right, it's really cool. But as is the way with game development, he kind of ran out of time and things were not looking so great as far as like getting all this stuff done and doing it well. So he actually had to drop the DM function completely out of his Thesis of Terror. So the second computer instead just held maps. It was like a file server. So you're using 2 computers to play one game, which is still pretty cool. You know,
I'm sure that would. Neat.
I feel like in the 80s that would be great for a master's thesis at MIT. You know,
it's pretty good. Yeah. When you could use a video game as your master's thesis in 1982. That's crazy.
Oh, and I mean, it's bachelor's thesis. That's crazy. You have to do a bachelor's thesis. I said it wrong, too, but I didn't know you had to do bachelor's thesis. Theses?
Yeah, well,
Thesi?
I guess we didn't go to a school like MIT.
Nope, we sure didn't. State school for Tyler and I all the way. Okay, so.
Go Cougs.
Oh, go Cougs. After graduating from MIT, Palovich went on to work at Atari. He actually worked in their research division, and there he made a lot of stuff that never came out. According to Wikipedia, he worked on the unreleased Atari Sierra personal computer, specifically the operating system for that, and then he also worked on an Atari AMY sound chip, which was never used in any product of Atari. Yeah, kind of a bummer. But he did end up taking Thesis of Terror and turning it into Dandy. So
Well, that's good.
Dandy was released in May 1983, and it was a part of the mail-in Atari program exchange service. Now, mail-in stuff, very popular in the 80s and 90s. In fact, the episode I was going to do this week about Quake and stuff, which we're putting on hold for a very good reason that I'll talk about at the end of the episode, also talks about a lot about this mail-in model of like shareware, and then you mail it in. You mail in a check, and they send you the rest of the game. So that was kind of a cool thing that Atari did at this time, too.
Nice.
Yeah, so in making Thesis of Terror into Dandy, they had to remove some stuff. For example, the DM function was no longer there. You couldn't, like, DM at all in any way, shape, or form. Like, as in they got rid of the second PC entirely. So they couldn't... You could do maps and stuff on the second PC. Now the second PC is gone, and if you want to do maps, you just put them on a floppy disk, and that's your DM function, quote unquote. But really, you're just making your own maps, which is still cool, you know? Why
Yeah,
not?
it's still neat.
But another change also was to remove the ability to go back and to go to previous levels of the dungeon you already went through. And the reason they got rid of this, and this is kind of funny, and I feel like I've done this in a lot of games personally, and maybe you have too, Tyler, is they play tested it and they found out that a lot of people were going back to previous levels completely on accident because they were lost.
Yeah, I've definitely done that.
Which I have definitely done that too. And I was like, oh, I feel it. I'm glad they just got rid of it. And because they got rid of it, turns out the game started loading faster because it didn't have to worry about players on the possibility of players going back to those previous levels. So,
that's good.
Yeah,
so there's hidden bonuses there.
yeah, and in 1983, that's probably great because your load times were probably terrible because it's 1983, you know? So,
Yeah.
The other thing also is there were cassettes. As we talked about last week, why would you even use a cassette, you know, to play the game? But it was an option. You could play on a floppy disk, or you could be a weirdo and play on a cassette tape.
Yeah, floppy disk drives were expensive in the early days.
Oh, is that why? Maybe that's why.
Yeah, cassettes were generally cheaper, but yeah, like once floppy disks became cheap enough that like anybody could get them, it was like they're clearly 100% better than cassettes. Get that trash out of here.
You just made me so anti-cassette last episode, you know? I actually was like, I just went out and burned a bunch of cassette tapes after last week's episode.
Well, they are trash. They are objectively the worst way to load programs into a computer.
Oh, the worst
besides
part,
like punch cards.
The worst part about it is if you wanted to like change levels, you had to like stop the tape and restart the tape to like switch levels.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
that sounds awful.
Yeah. So anyway, that was Dandy, and Dandy did well. It was fun. People enjoyed it. It didn't sell a lot because it was only on these Atari 8-bit computers, but it was considered a success by Atari. Atari in 1988 would go on to release another game called Dark Chambers that was essentially Dandy. It came out on the Atari 2600, 7800, and the Atari 8-bit family, and also in the manual, it says copyright 1983, John Howard Palovich. So it's like they essentially just took Dandy and made it into another game and shipped it out to the point where they just left his name on it. So
Gotcha.
yeah, it only supported 2 players and it had like fewer enemies on screen than Dandy or Gauntlet in this case, but it was still worth mentioning. So when Edlog realized he could use that original Dandy as sort of the foundation for his game, not necessarily like just straight up ripping it off, but using that format of top-down 4-player, he was excited, and he started working on Dungeon was the name of the title. That was the working title, was Dungeon. And from 1983 to 1985, they worked on it. The team was led by Edlog and Roger Ziegler, and Dungeon, as a title for a game, became legally unavailable in April 1985. In the video I watched, they talked about because it was too similar to Dungeons & Dragons, and they were nervous about that. I couldn't find any sort of other citation except for that video, but I bet you that's why. So they renamed it to Gauntlet in May of 1985. Now, Gauntlet is unique for Atari because until that point, up until that point, Gauntlet was the most elaborate hardware scheme of any of Atari's arcade cabinets. It was the first coin-operated game for Atari that had its own voice synthesizer chip.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, and I'll explain why it needs a voice synthesizer chip in a second. But Gauntlet, if you don't know, is a top-down 4-player co-op dungeon crawler where the goal is to get to the end of the maze and move on to the exit of the level. There are 4 player characters you can choose from. Thor, who's a warrior. Merlin, classic wizard name, so they're a wizard. Thyra, who's a Valkyrie, or Questor, who's an elf. Each class has their own advantages. For example, Thor is strongest in hand-to-hand combat. The wizard has the most powerful magic. The Valkyrie has the strongest armor. And the elf is the fastest moving character in the game. Big important thing I forgot to put in my notes. 4 people play, and you could only be one. You couldn't have 2 warriors. Okay,
everybody had to pick one of the choices.
Yeah. So players face your standard array of fantasy enemies. I'm talking ghosts, I'm talking demons, I'm talking grunts, I'm talking sorcerers, thieves, you know. There's also this enemy called Death, and Death can only be destroyed with a magic potion. Otherwise, Death will automatically go away after draining a certain amount of your health, which is kind of a hot bummer. But the enemies in the game come out of these generators, kind of like monster spawners in Minecraft. If you're thinking of a modern example, they have the mob spawners, the little cages with the flame inside of them. It's like that. They had a pile of bones. Ghosts will come out of a pile of bones. You got to kill all the ghosts and then kill the pile of bones.
Those are in the PlayStation version. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes it so the enemies stop spawning. So you got to do that. Keys are super important because they open doors for the levels. Also, sometimes the levels have bonus items if you use those keys, or a different route around. There are magic potions that kind of act like smart bombs and clear out enemies that you can use. Poison will take your character's energy level down. Treasure is all over the place, and it's only used to determine your score. So food is also a thing in these games, which I thought was interesting, an interesting mechanic. You have to keep your player fed, otherwise their health just slowly goes down over time. So it's kind of a race to find food, kill bad guys. There's a lot of things you're thinking about in this game while you're playing it. Seems pretty crazy, which is probably what you want in an arcade game because you want people to throw in more quarters, you know?
Yeah.
There's also teleporters that you need to access certain areas, and I watched some gameplay footage, and the teleporters seem like the one way to make it so that you get kind of a break from battle, because you'll sometimes teleport into a room that enemies can't get into, and that's your only respite, you know? It's your only time to sit and think about what you've done and how your teammates are completely screwing you over.
And whether or not Wizard needs food badly.
It's true. Wizard does need food badly. So the key with Gauntlet, as Tyler just mentioned, is cooperation. Apparently, this game started a lot of rage quitting early on. You really have to have you and your 3 friends working together so you can essentially lure the enemies into kill zones where you can just Wreck-It Ralph them with all your attacks. That's the way to do it. The game also has 100 levels. The first 7 levels are always the same, and then starting with the 8th level, it's totally randomized. And if you get to the end, if you beat all 100 levels, you don't beat the game. It just starts all over again. There is no end to Gauntlet, the original Gauntlet.
Oh, man.
So that voice chip,
existential.
Yeah, it's right. It's just a nonstop kill fest, a fantasy dungeon kill fest. That's how I would describe it. That voice chip I talked about, that is actually the role of the narrator, or if you really want to get fantasy with it, that's where the DM went. That's where the Dungeon Master goes.
Oh, okay.
So that's the Dungeon Master. He's there to tell you your character's health is low. I have a bunch of quotes down here. Actually, I'll read it in a second. But the voice is a guy named Ernie Fossilius, which is a really fun name to say, Fossilius. And the speech chip was a Texas Instruments TMS 5220C speech chip. I was just super stoked to see Texas Instruments in something that's not a graphing calculator. I don't know about you. I actually saw I saw a Reddit thread recently. Why are those still a thing? Super expensive
those TI-83 calculators?
Yeah. They made a good point. They're why is this still a thing in 2020 that this graphing calculator you have to have, and you can't just have an app on your computer?
It's all a conspiracy, I bet.
It is.
Just to continue. So, and those calculators still cost $100. There's no way a TI-83 still costs $100 to make.
No way.
It can't cost more than $5 to make.
They're pumping those things out and just charging an exorbitant rate. I remember it being a big thing. When I got one in high school, my mom's like, "Don't lose this. Don't get it stolen. Be very careful with it, because it's important." Anyway, okay, sorry, got distracted by the Texas Instruments, by Big Texas.
Welcome
Instruments.
to Codex, the history of graphing calculators.
That's right. There are some great games on those graphing calculators. We can talk about those someday.
Actually, that's a worthwhile episode to do, probably.
It really is. I remember that Galaga one where you could upgrade your ship. I spent so many hours in math class playing that game. Okay, some fun things the DM says is shots do not hurt your other players yet. Like it's
Yet.
Remember, don't shoot food. Elf shot the food. The warrior needs food badly. I've not seen such bravery. Or let's see you get out of here. Or if your like character health falls below 200, the narrator will say things like your life force is running out, or elf needs food, or Valkyrie is about to die. Like it's kind of fun. Like it's supposed to be
pretty
like,
advanced for the 80s.
Yeah, and the speech chip was like a pretty big thing about the game. Like it had some tension to it. Another thing, too, is that voice also is used as like a countdown because there are treasure rooms that are like bonus levels you'll find in the game. And your goal is to collect a bunch of treasure in a certain amount of a time limit. And in that case, the narrator would be kind of like 10, 9, like countdown like that. So Gauntlet, the original Gauntlet, was released in November 1985. And then there was an NES port that came out in 1987. And the fun fact about the NES port is on the cover it says the #1 arcade game, but there are some pretty significant differences between the NES version and the arcade version. For example, the NES version had new levels. It added a story to the game. It also added a lot of the like updates because this is kind of around the time that Gauntlet 2 came out, so they kind of put some stuff in there, some quality of life changes that Gauntlet 2 had. There was no voiceover because, as we all know, the NES could not handle speech at all. There was just no way it could do it. It did not have a chip for that. But you could still hear a sound effect like injury or eating food. Gauntlet was among the first NES games to be developed in the US, which is really interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Really anywhere outside of Japan. That just didn't happen before this time. There are actually 2 different Gauntlet cartridges. There's an NES, a gray version for the NES, and that one's the licensed by Nintendo version. And then there is a black unlicensed version, and that's because of Tengen's lawsuits against Nintendo. Remember, is it Tengen or Tengen? Did we figure that out?
I think it's Tengen.
Tengen, yeah. So that was like Atari's split company they made.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was a really interesting time because they had sued Nintendo, or they tried to make them without Nintendo's blessing, and Nintendo's like, you can't do that, and so they sued Nintendo, and there's a whole thing there.
A whole thing, a whole bunch of stuff.
We did an episode on it.
We sure did. You can go back and listen to that, or again, just Google it. So we're really good at podcasting. We should only say listen to episodes. But yeah, they both have the same box art on those cartridges. It's just the color of the cartridge. Like if you get the one that's black NES cartridge, you know that's the unlicensed version that Tengen tried to put out, which is kind of cool. That's like a little piece of gaming history. You can also play Gauntlet, though, on MS-DOS, Apple II, Macintosh, MSX, Apple IIgs, Sega Master System, Atari ST, Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, and the ZX Spectrum. I almost said ZX. I remember this time. Now, I mentioned earlier on that Edlog was influenced by Dandy. Well, there were some issues that rose out of that. Edlog is credited in Gauntlet and its NES port, but John Palovich threatened a lawsuit, I believe while he was still working at Atari, being like, yo, this is just Dandy, essentially. And so the conflict, I guess, and this is like kind of, I couldn't find a lot of information on this, but it was settled, according to Tengen, by they just gave Palovich a Gauntlet game machine. That's how they settled it. Like it was settled out of court. They didn't go to trial. And he has special thanks in the credits for later on versions of the game. And log is actually removed from the credits on later releases and on the NES port of the game, which is interesting. So there must have been some sort of deal where they're like, you have to pull Edlog's name, special thanks to me, and then give me a machine so I can play it, or something like that.
It's one of those, like, I'm not mad at you for doing this. I just want to be recognized. That's all.
Yeah, and it's also important to know that in, like, 2012, Edlog said, like, at GDC, says he couldn't have made this game without Dandy. Like, this, I don't think there's any, like, hard feelings there.
Yeah.
And so it's, like, kind of good to know that, yeah, there's no hard feelings. This was like the late 80s were kind of the Wild West for these arcade games, and like I would say, or like early to late 80s, just the whole 80s in general. Is a better way to say that. Is
the whole 80s are just a Wild West.
Just the Wild
Nobody really
West
remembers them
for arcade systems. You know, things were getting crazy. People were like trying out new stuff. It's just super different. Another thing that came out during this time is there was an expansion pack, is what I'm going to call it, to Gauntlet, called Gauntlet: The Deeper Dungeons, and that added 512 new levels.
Was that for the arcade version? Was it like a thing you put in the arcade, or was it a separate?
No. So this was it was made by a British company called US Gold, and they would come out later. And then the company Mindscape in the United States made it, but it came out on personal computers, the Amstrad CPC, MSX, Atari ST, Commodore 64, and the ZX Spectrum. So this was like, at first when I was researching it, I'm like, is this an unlicensed expansion? I couldn't really tell, but then in later Gauntlet releases, you see they're like co-developed by US Gold and these companies, so I don't think it was unlicensed. I think it was like just they're putting it out in Europe, and they're also putting out like just distribution wise. I think they needed to do it in different ways that way. So many of its levels were actually from a competition in Europe where they took 10 winners that designed really great levels and gave them prizes. This is kind of funny. Like you get a T-shirt and a copy of the game is what you would win for making a level for them, which I thought was funny.
Nice.
But yeah, the levels were just presented randomly, just like before in the game. Like they loaded in randomly, and it was a fun little neat expansion they added in there. They actually say that the levels are like so hard compared to the original Gauntlet that you're better off just playing Gauntlet 2, because this was kind of came out at the same time that Gauntlet 2 was coming out, and reviewers are like, you should just play Gauntlet 2. Like it's a little bit too little too late in that situation. Yeah. But for the original Gauntlet, this is fun. I love stats where we get to talk about like arcade cabinet sales and how much money they made in quarters. This is fun for me.
Yeah,
so
this is fun.
Atari sold 7,848 Gauntlet video game arcade cabinets. It was super profitable. Okay, so upon November 1985 launch, one arcade in San Mateo, California, said they earned $15,000 in 16 weeks.
Dang.
And then there was a Canadian operator that earned $4,500 in 9 days. So,
whoa.
this is like a pretty big moneymaker. In Japan, the Game Machine listed it as their second most successful upright arcade unit of the year. And this came out in like November. So,
wow.
Yeah. Actually, that's a 1986 second most successful arcade cabinet of the year. But at the 1986 Golden Joystick Awards, Gauntlet won Game of the Year, and then it got the runner-up in the category of Arcade Style Game of the Year. So that's pretty neat,
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. So Gauntlet, I mean, it's got a great legacy of being this just craziness going on the screen. It's pretty hard. It's fun to play with friends, and it's like the true arcade co-op experience. Like in the same way that I think you and I remember the X-Men arcade game, with like 6 people playing on one cabinet. This was the predecessor to that. But we're going to talk about Gauntlet 2. So Gauntlet 2 gets to start out in the fun way of the 1980s with another fan contest.
Man, I always wanted to win a fan contest.
They love fan contests in the 80s. They're all about it. So players got to submit their level designs, ideas, any suggestions or whatever for Gauntlet, and the winners of the contest were announced in the April 1986 issue of Atari Games' newsletter. And then the developers implemented their submissions. So it's like you get to be a game designer. That was your award.
That's cool.
Just seems like they're trying
Sounds like a great way to get other people to do your job for you. But,
I was about to say that. It was like a contest that was an internship. That's what it feels like. So let's talk about new features. That's kind of what I'm going to do in these other Gauntlet games, is just describe the new features of them. So in Gauntlet 2, big change. You can now pick the same character. You can have 2 warriors, 4 wizards.
Boom.
They're
Big
all
deal.
different colors. So just say like blue wizard or green wizard or whatever. There are reflective shots, so you can ricochet shots off the walls, which is pretty handy to get out of certain situations or like hit enemies before they can see you. The maps randomly rotate 90 degrees to throw you off,
Whoa.
which I think is a really cool feature. There's acid puddles on the ground. Watch out for those. There's a giant dragon.
Watch out for that.
Mm-hmm. There's also this new enemy type called the It. And the It enemy is not Stephen King's It. Instead, if the It enemy touches you, you are it, like in Tag. And all the enemies come at you. They're attracted to you. And there are 2 things you can do. You can be a hero, and you could just lure all the enemies away from your party. Or you could say, screw this, and tag your friend, and then now they're it. And then you can run away. There are a bunch of other new like level mechanic things too. There's invisible walls. There's magic walls that when you go up to them, they turn into enemies. And then there's also like stun tiles that stun you in the name. It's pretty much just a descriptive name right there, you know. So during the release of Gauntlet 2, Atari actually held a second contest. Because like I said, the 80s, we love contests. And this one's actually really cool. So players were tasked to find all of the secret rooms in the game. Because they put secret rooms in there on purpose. And if you found all the secret rooms, you would enter your name and then you'd get a code. Okay? And you got to hold on to that code number because you were entered into a prize pool and you would either win a t-shirt. Okay? The 500 entries would win a t-shirt, the first 500. Or if you just beat it, you get thrown to a grand prize drawing to win a $5,000 government savings bond.
That's interesting. Government savings bond, not just $5,000, but like here's an investment vehicle for you.
Yeah, because I mean, maybe like kids. I don't know. Like, hey, a lot of kids.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
yeah, okay, all right.
I had a government savings bond. I think, if I recall, it like went up like very little, like 20. Here's like $20 more than you would have gotten before. And I'm like, you know what?
Yeah, well,
feels right. It's $20 more than I had. Okay, so Gauntlet 2 was ported to the ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, Amiga, Atari ST, and MS-DOS in 1988. They released these versions in North America. Once again, Mindscape helped with that. They did the same thing with the expansion pack. And then in Europe, US Gold, which is very confusing that the European publisher is named US Gold. But
that is interesting.
Maybe they're like, ooh, look at this, European people, we're US Gold, you know?
Buy gold from the United States. Just kidding, it's video games.
It's like they're trying to sell them Budweiser. Like, no one wants that. Okay, so most versions only supported 2 players in those ports, but the Atari ST version had an adapter that would let you plug in extra joysticks so you could get to 4. Because I think that's the big thing about these games is you got to have that 4-player experience.
Yeah.
Mindscape later actually did port the game to the NES in 1990, and then also there's a Game Boy version of Gauntlet 2. And I was actually reading up, and a lot of people liked the Game Boy version a lot, which I think is
good.
Cool. Yeah. So, and also, unlike that NES version of Gauntlet 1, where they kind of made some quality of life changes and added a story to it and stuff like that, Gauntlet 2 was more just like straight up, we're just putting Gauntlet 2 arcade onto the Nintendo. There's no story. It's just Gauntlet. Here you go. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
There's also a way you can play Gauntlet 2 now. There was a Midway Arcade Treasures 2 that came out in 2004, and that lets you play it on Xbox, PlayStation 2, or GameCube. And then there's our Midway Arcade Origins, and that came out in 2012, and that came out on PS3 and Xbox 360. So you could play these still if you wanted to play Gauntlet 2. I would say you don't have to play it that way, though, because it's most likely, like, there's a lot of Flash sites that let you play arcade games in Flash format, and it's the way to go. I mean, if you just want to try it out, I strongly recommend doing that instead of paying your money. So just try it out, and if you like it, then you can pay your money, you know? Also, this was, you could download it for a short time on the PS3 Sony Entertainment Store. That's no longer available, though. So you have to find discs I would recommend of the Midway Arcade Origins or the Midway Arcade Treasures 2. That's the way to play Gauntlet 2. Now, Gauntlet 3 is important because it's not really what I would consider Gauntlet 3. So Ed Logg wanted to make Gauntlet 3 in 3D because that makes sense. 3D, right?
Yeah,
Tyler?
by the third game, you should have 3D figured out for sure.
Yeah. Atari then was like, nah, you're not going to do that. We like the way it is for arcades. Everyone likes Gauntlet this way. Don't change it. So then Logg went on to work on a different game and used those Gauntlet 3 3D ideas into a game for him called Zybots in 1987. It's also Atari. It's not Gauntlet, though, so we're not going to talk about it. So what I'm trying to tell you is, from this point on, Gauntlet is Ed Logg free. I'm sorry, everyone.
Aww.
But yeah, we'll miss you, Ed Logg. So Gauntlet 3 is actually called Gauntlet the Third Encounter, and it's not really Gauntlet 3. It's a weird one. It's another situation where a game was called something else and was designed to be something else, and then in the last minute they're like, let's throw Gauntlet on this. So that's how that worked. This came out in the Atari Lynx in 1990. The game was originally called Time Quest and Treasure Chest, and it was made by Epic Software, but they switched it to the Gauntlet IP and then released it through I think Tengen because they were like, you know what, everyone knows what Gauntlet is. Let's do it that way. You have a story, kinda. You have to go through a dungeon to find the star gem, and that's all I could find out about the story. So you got to find the star gem. But here are the big major changes. You can play as 2 of the original classes. The Valkyrie and the Wizard are in this game. And then there are 6 new classes to choose from. Those are the Samurai, the Punk Rocker, the Android, the Gunfighter, the Nerd, and the Pirate.
Those are all fantasy tropes, sure.
Sure, right? I remember when punk rockers were running around Lord of the Rings. It's my favorite time.
Yeah, yep.
So you can play up to 4 players, but you gotta, again, just like Gauntlet 1, you can't be different classes. You have to, like, one person can be the samurai and one person can be the punk rocker. So it's already off to a bad start if you look at it from me, because they're going backwards from Gauntlet 2, which is never a good sign. There's only 40 levels in this game. You could link Atari Lynx systems for multiplayer, which is kind of cool. And this is one of the few Atari Lynx games that actually use the vertical mode. So what they mean by this is if you watch a gameplay video of this game, it kind of looks like it's filmed on a cell phone. Like it's got that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't really know why they did it, but they did it. The other cool thing about this game is it has like the top-down square in the middle upper a bit, because again, it's like a vertical rectangle. Like a portrait mode rectangle in the middle, if you're going to talk like Microsoft Office. And then and underneath it, it has like your viewpoint in first person. So when a ghost walks in front of you and the top screen above, you kind of see it below, which they did that in like Baldur's Gate and those older RPGs like that. I just thought it was a cool thing that they put in this game. But there's really not a lot to say about this game. It got mixed reviews. And I think this was one of the instances where, and we see it a lot, where a publisher is trying to sell games and just desperately pulls an older IP that people know and throws it on a game to try to sell it. And we don't see that happen very well a lot in this podcast when we cover it. I think we can all agree on that. But this is just one of those instances where it happened. I don't think this game's bad. In fact, Pac-Man QC, who I talked about before, actually said this game's pretty decent. The only problem with it is it's like noticeably different as far as like the speed in which you can attack. So when you have like a bunch of enemies coming at you, you can't kill them fast enough, and it's kind of frustrating. That was the only thing that I could really see about this game, though. Like, again, there's not a lot about this game except for Pac-Man's video. So sorry, everybody. But is it Pac-Man or Pat-Man? I think I'm saying this wrong the whole time. It's Pat-Man. I am so sorry. Yeah, I mean,
I think you said it right at the start.
Yeah, to be fair, though, I mean, it's Pat-Man and Pac-Man are very close to each other. But
yes,
let's move on to, I say here in the last game. It's not the last game. We got 2 more games left. But this one's super important because this one kind of takes us closer to what we saw as Gauntlet of our youth. And that is called Gauntlet 3, The Final Quest. This is the 3rd Gauntlet. So this is exciting because it was released in spring 1991 for the Amiga, Atari ST, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, and Amstrad PC. The Amiga and Atari ST versions were developed by a company called Software Creations, and then while the rest was done by Tengen. But I think we're kind of going to talk more about the Software Creations version. And like I said, if you want to know more info on Tengen, old Atari episodes, we did them. Get to it. This game, though, is top-down isometric, meaning 3D-ish.
All right.
Yeah, it's looking a lot like...
Ed Log wasn't involved, but he got what he wanted.
Got what he wanted, yeah. So this looks a lot like, kind of like Diablo. The only problem with the 3D-looking approach, and we'll talk about this more in detail in a bit, is because it uses so much memory, you can only have maybe 8 enemies at a time on the screen, so it kind of loses the tension factor of being like surrounded by enemies, like the old Gauntlet games. Mm-hmm. The original 4 characters are all there, making a triumphant return after leaving out the poor warrior and elf from the third encounter, or whatever the last one was called. I don't even remember the name of that last game. That's how much I just didn't even... The third encounter. I nailed it. Never mind. Okay. But they also introduce new characters. 4 new characters, and they are Petrus, who is a rock man. Dracolis, who is a lizard man. Blizzard, who is an ice man. And Neptune, who is a merman. Yeah, that's right. Where are my Zoolander fans at? I'm a merman, everybody. So there are 5 areas, each, and each kingdom has 5 areas, and there's 8 kingdoms total. So that's 40 levels for you to play in this version of Gauntlet. The fun part is it's not just get to the end of the maze. It's actually sometimes you got to complete some objectives before you can get to the end of the maze.
That's cool.
And to avoid the player being lost, the programmers actually created a hand that appears from time to time named Clippy. I'm just kidding. It's not named Clippy. The hand has no name. The hand is just kind of holds a note that reminds you of what you're supposed to be doing at this time, which is kind of nice. You know, you got to have that. So
yeah.
Another thing they did also is there is a combination lock key code that you must consult to open some things, like a physical thing to look at in the game box that you need to use to solve some puzzles in the game. And this was not only a fun little thing to make it like real world in the video game, but also it's kind of an anti-pirating thing. Because if you pirated this game and you didn't have that little key lock combination decoder thing that came in the box, you couldn't move on in the game. So
there were a lot of games that did interesting like copy protection things at the time.
I like that. I think it's cool. Yeah, I think it's pretty neat.
It's neat.
So the enemies in this game are fun because they're all brand new, except for ghosts. Because the one interview I saw with software creation devs said that, like, hey, you know what? Ghosts are kind of like quintessential to the Gauntlet experience. So we're going to leave ghosts in, but we're going to design every other enemy as brand new. Now, I mentioned that the game had memory issues with enemies on the screen, but there were some other memory issues they had to deal with. They had some problems with AI getting stuck in walls. They had problems with sprites not loading correctly. And then they also had a serious inventory problem. So in the old Gauntlets, you could actually pick up potions and kind of hold on to them and choose when to use them. In this version, they didn't have the memory to do that. So when you pick up a potion in this version of Gauntlet, you just used it immediately. And these are the magic potions that like wipe the screen. So kind of a bummer in that situation. This game got mixed reviews, which I was surprised about because the graphics were praised, but a lot of people found like this just really repetitive, and especially the art was kind of repetitive. And this is Gauntlet trying to go into the 3D era at a time when I think people just wanted more Gauntlet, more old Gauntlet.
They just wanted the same thing again.
Yeah. So maybe Atari was right in the initial times. I don't know. But the one that does give you the ultimate Gauntlet experience is not an arcade game, but actually Gauntlet 4 for the Sega Genesis is, to many Gauntlet fans, the best way to get a home version of that arcade Gauntlet. Still, don't get me wrong, like arcade Gauntlet in an arcade with 3 of your friends, that's the best way to play Gauntlet, okay? Or Gauntlet 2, because Gauntlet 2 is just an improvement on the original Gauntlet. But Gauntlet 4 is the best way to get this at home. And Gauntlet 4 is fun because it actually started as like a homebrew port of the original Gauntlet for the Sharp X68000, which is a computer. It was a homebrew project by a bunch of friends in Japan who wanted to like make this for that. And then they formed a development studio called M2. Tengen caught notice of M2 and this sweet homebrew project they made, and we're like, hey, we're going to buy that from you, and we're just going to make that our sequel that's going to go on the Sega Genesis. So that's what they did. And this is, like I said before, the best top-down Gauntlet experience on a home console. There's multiple modes you can play. There's a quest mode, that's like the story mode. There's an arcade mode, which is pretty much just like straight up you like playing Gauntlet 1, where you'll go through all the levels and they just randomize and then they repeat and the game never ends. That's arcade mode. There's also something called deathmatch mode, battle mode. Couldn't find a lot on those modes. I'm guessing they're PvP. I have no idea. I truly don't. I did find, and I posted this on the Discord. We have a sources tab in the Discord that I'm going to post all the fun links I use in. And I found a PDF. I sent this to you, Tyler, of Mega Drive magazine. And I got like feels of my childhood and looking at the way it was like edited, like those old magazines for games in like the 90s and the 80s where they had like so many bubbles everywhere and it was just a mess, but I loved it. Yeah. And it just gave me all of the feelings, and it was actually really positively reviewed in that Mega Drive magazine. And so that's like kind of fun. If you join the Discord, you can see it in the sources tab. The quest mode story is very loose, and from what I gathered watching gameplay videos, What you have to do is solve the mystery of the 2 ancient towers that are guarding the castle full of treasures. And once you break the spell of the towers, you can then go into the castle and win, is what I gather. So that's the goal. Sega's multi-tab adapter works for this, though. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Sega Genesis, listeners, but it only had 2 ports. If you have the multi-tab adapter, you can plug in 4 controllers and play this game arcade style with 4 players. So this is the version of Gauntlet that everyone wanted. Not a lot to say about it. It was very well received. The only downside was the voice wasn't as good as the arcade cabinet because, once again, consoles didn't have the voice chips that arcade cabinets did, because arcade cabinets, super expensive, directly from Atari. Sega's wasn't planning on having this game when they made the Sega Genesis and having this voice chip. So that's the only real downside. The music is bumping. I listened to the soundtrack for a bit while I was writing these notes. It's pretty sweet. Soundtrack was made by Hitoshi Sakimoto and Masahara Iwata, and it's rad. And also, the music, it just gets you amped up. It's really good, really solid. But next time we discuss Gauntlet, we are going to go into what I think I and Tyler played in arcades or home consoles when we were growing up. I'm talking Gauntlet Legacy, Gauntlet Dark Legacy. Yeah, we're getting into it. We're even going to talk about the 2014 release of Gauntlet, the newest Gauntlet release, because I feel like it's been enough time. 2014, that's 6 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, so that's what we'll do down the road. I mentioned up at the top of this episode, I was going to do Quake and id Software this week, and then I found the book Masters of Doom, which kind of chronicles the foundings of id Software and making Doom, which we already covered, but I feel like it would be fun to use this book as our primary source instead of me just scouring Wikipedia and YouTube trying to find documentaries that people made. So we're going to spend some quality time reading that book over the next couple weeks. Tyler and I are both
back
reading
to our
it.
roots.
Yeah, we're going back to our roots. We're using a book. It's going to become a book club again for a little bit, I think. But I mean, you're going to try to keep it down to a couple episodes. I don't want it to go too long, but so that's it. And then we'll do that next week. I don't know what we're doing next week. What are you doing next week? Do you know yet? More Mac gaming?
Probably. We'll see.
I love the Mac gaming.
I think so.
Episodes.
I think it's going to be Mac gaming.
Because we're on Mac now, right? We did Apple.
Yeah, we did Apple. We went through the Apple II stuff, so now it's onto the Macintosh.
That's going to be so fun. But yeah, we'll do that. And then I don't know if I'm going to do a Gauntlet episode next. It's going to probably be down the road when we get to those other Gauntlet ones. I'll keep it in the old, holster, Okay, so... big thing. I mentioned it at the top of the episode. I mentioned it in the middle of the episode. We have a Discord now. We made the Discord because we realized it would be way easier to organize a Ricochet game if we had a Discord. And it is a public Discord. And the link to be invited to it is pinned to the top of my Twitter profile. So if you go see at Mecoletta, MECOLETTA, you will see the invitation to join the Discord. All you got to do, click on the link, and you'll join the Discord, and then go to the rules, read the rules tab, and then click the little green checkbox, and then it makes you a member. It makes you a Jaybird, if I recall. I made the members Jaybirds, and then I made the admins John Glames. That's how it's made. Right now, Tyler and I are the only John Glameses. Sorry, everybody, but you can get there someday if you believe. But yeah, so... I think it'd be fun to talk about stuff. We've already had some people share their consoles and stuff on that and their thoughts and everything, and also post some cool sources of their own. So I want to make that the place where we can just kind of talk about stuff, but you can always email us, and we're going to go through some emails now. Right, Tyler?
Yeah. You want me to take the first email here?
Sure. I've done so much talking.
Yeah, I figured you could use a break here. So we've got one from Matt in Japan. He says, "Hey, Mike and Tyler, regarding Tyler's assumption about people in Japan learning English in order to program, he is correct. Programming in Japan is generally done in English with the exception of code comments and certain variable names which are written in Japanese. Also, to give you guys some insight on Japanese keyboards, modern keyboards in Japan use your typical QWERTY style layout with some exceptions. For example, the apostrophe key is part of the 5 key, and you have to press Shift 5 to get an apostrophe. Also printed on the letter keys are the Japanese letters for writing in Japanese, but it's also possible to write in Japanese using the romanized spelling of Japanese words, which is how ya boy does it. Also, the game that I love but am really bad at is Tetris, especially competitive versions like Tetris 99 and Puyo Puyo Tetris. Your boy in Japan, Matt.
That's
Thanks,
so
Matt.
good to know. Thank you, Matt. I'm also really terrible at Tetris 99.
Yeah, me too. Never won. Played a lot. Never won.
I played like 3 games, got smoked, and didn't know what was going on, and I was just like, I'm bad at this, and I don't even want to try.
It's so fun.
We should play it together, you and I, Tyler. Let's play it sometime. Okay, next one's from Ryan. Hey guys, this is Ryan the Younger. Oh, look at this. I like this. Only 26 compared to old man Ryan in his 30s. Gosh, I really don't like old man Ryan being like old man Ryan.
I know.
Okay, he's from this Ryan, young Ryan, Ontario, Canada. He found the podcast. He said, I found your podcast a few weeks ago when I was told I can listen to them at work, and I've been loving it. If I could leave a rating on Spotify, I'd give it a 5 out of 5. Thank you, Ryan. I didn't know you can't rate things on Spotify, so I was saying that in our earlier episodes, but I think it's pretty well known that I'm a ding-dong at this point, and our listeners know that. So, okay, Ryan goes on to say, a few episodes back, you guys were talking about memories in computer gaming, and it brought up how back in high school, we were able to get Quake 3 running on every computer in the building on a big LAN party going on. It was good times.
My man.
Did you do that too, Tyler?
I didn't do Quake 3. The thing that we got running on almost every computer that we could in high school was the demo for Halo. It was great because it had Team Slayer, and the only map it came with was Blood Gulch, which is fine.
Why you
it's
say
all
the
you
map?
need.
Yeah, you don't need
right,
the map.
and it was free, so we could just install it on every computer possible, and it was great.
Was it just a disc that you had running around? You were installing the disc on it?
No, I think somebody had like a network share that they like shared it on the network somehow. Either they would do that, or we passed around flash drives.
That's still awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Ryan goes on to say, also, I think it'd be cool to do a history of the Lego games. That's great. I grew up on those, and they were always a blast. Keep making these hotcake and gangbusters episodes, Ryan the Younger. Thank you, Ryan the Younger, from Canada, Ontario, Canada. Do you want to do the next one?
Yeah, we got one from Mike. From Mark. He says, "Hi, Mike and Tyler. Just listened to your last episode on early Apple games and wanted to warn you that you may be receiving angry emails from Sierra adventure game fans, as you said that the Scum engine made it easier for LucasArts to make more adventure games, such as the Leisure Suit Larry games. But Sierra Online developed these games, not LucasArts. Dun, dun, dun." I think he's referring specifically to the Leisure Suit Larry games, because those were developed by Sierra Online. But the Scum engine was developed by LucasArts to make their games as well. Sierra Online actually went through a few iterations of the engines themselves, starting with Adventure Game Interpreter AGI engine between 1984 and 1990. These are the old Sierra adventures with the 160 by 200 resolution text parser and no mouse and sound card support, such as the original King's Quest, Police Quest, and Leisure Suit Larry. Then Sierra Creative Interpreter version 0, SCI 0, from about 1988 to 1990, which had games like Space Quest 3 and the first Quest for Glory, now with 320 by 200 resolution, mouse and sound card support. And then SCI 1 through 3 from 1990 onwards, which got rid of the text parser, used verb icons, and had support for 256 colors. So we're talking games like King's Quest 5, Space Quest 4, and Great Gabriel Knight were developed on these engines. So if anything can be said about LucasArts and Scum is that they probably got to a non-text parser interface before Sierra did, since it was about 1990 when Sierra adopted SCI 1 and Scum was already being used in 1987. Speaking of adventure games, that could be a potential episode, i.e. covering adventure games in general, or one for LucasArts, one for Sierra, one for Infocom, one for Legend Entertainment, etc. Did you guys get into adventure games from the late 80s to mid-90s? Anyway, I continue to enjoy your podcast. Now go do that voodoo that you do so well. Stay safe. Mark G. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I don't have a lot of experience with
Me neither.
adventure games. Do you? I remember I played Monkey Island. Or Monkey Island?
That's one of them.
Yeah,
I never played that.
But I never beat it. I played it for like a little bit. You know, it was like one of those computer lab games. You didn't play that long, but you just played it and you
when
liked
you finished your typing test,
Yeah.
they let you play
I should
games.
play more. They have like Monkey Island 2, I think, on Xbox now, if I recall.
Yeah, I know they did a remake of the Monkey Island games. Oh, gosh, probably a decade ago now. They remade them, but they have like all cool new art and stuff.
Yeah, we should. That's a great idea, though. I really think we could do like a LucasArts adventure games because they had like a run. You know, with
yeah,
like
they really
these-
did. They were cranking those things out.
Yeah, so we could definitely
Yeah,
discuss
like Mad
that.
Max, or not Mad Max, Sam and Max, Police Quest. Yeah, there's a lot of them.
I didn't even know that was a police quest. I didn't know that was a thing. I'm excited to learn more. Okay, last email is from Mo. Hey dudes, it's Mo. I am terrible at waiting in games. Any kind of unnecessary or excessive waiting in any games drives me nuts. Haha. I guess I fit the stereotype of the impatient, instant gratification loving millennial. Me too, Mo.
Same.
Me too. Mo goes on to say, I recently played through Morrowind again, and I love that game to bits, but the slow movement speed is a little ridiculous. It's so true. It's painful. The island is huge, and it takes a long time to walk/run from the nearest silt strider to some locations. Even running from one end of Vivek City to the other takes a pretty long time. That's a super good point, Mo, and I don't understand as a child when I was playing this game on Xbox. I just never noticed it. Like, it never bothered me, but now it feels like you're playing a game in slow motion. It drives me nuts. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. Mo goes on to say, I must have been 10 hours in when I couldn't take it anymore and caved. I used a console command to boost my character's speed stat to 600. 600 speed is pretty absurd and kind of hilarious. It made the game feel more like a Sonic game than an RPG, but I don't regret it. I definitely enjoyed this recent playthrough a lot. That's an amazing idea. I will do that for sure. Also, I also used mods and console commands to increase my running speed the last time I played through Oblivion and Fallout 3. Bethesda are the kings of slow movement speed in games. I guess, are there any other games that have really slow walking or running speeds? Spider butts. Mo. P.S. Looking forward to the Ricochet Showdown. I am too. Halo 3 just came out on PC, and Tyler and I have both played multiplayer separately, but I feel like the movement speed without sprinting just feels like you're crawling.
Yeah, it is. It is very slow. All the Halo games feel like that, and even once they give you sprint in like Reach, it's like very limited sprint.
Yeah.
It's very slow.
There's a lot of things. I mean, I think kind of we got spoiled in shooters when Call of Duty Modern Warfare really made it so like sprint was like the thing for multiplayer, especially when you want to move fast paced. But I feel like also older like Doom, you move quick in the original Doom.
Yeah, especially if you sprint. There's a sprint button in the original Doom,
you
if I recall
love
correctly,
it.
and you go very fast.
So really, it's like there was fast movement, and then there was this period where every developer was like, you need to go take things slowly and methodically. And now we're like back up to fast movement again with the sprint button, with the power of the clicking in the stick for sprinting if you're playing on console. Yep. So
I remember the Pokemon games feeling especially slow, even back in the day. Especially if you played on Pokemon Stadium and you got the double speed and the triple speed thing that lets you just like really fly through it. The game feels really slow in single speed after that.
Oh, you know what I'm really bad at too, now that I think about it, are the text boxes, and the speed of the text drives me crazy.
Yep.
Like in those old Pokemon games, like even if you turn fast text on, it just drives me nuts.
Still slow, yeah.
Still slow. But yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of games out there with slow if we're forgetting a slow movement game, that's really terrible. Email us, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Rate and review us wherever you can. Apple Podcasts is the big one. We have a new rating on there. Thank you, whoever rated us. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
But yeah, Twitter @Mecoletta, MECOLETTA. The Discord link's up there. Tyler's @SneakerElf, ELPH for the elf part. Is there anything I'm forgetting, Tyler?
No, I think that about covers it.
That about covers it. Thank you all so much for listening, and Tyler's going to say goodbye to you lovingly right now.
Goodbye, everybody.